Like I mentioned earlier, you may move to a new city where you know absolutely no one, or you may be solo traveling and like doing your backpacking across Europe, living your European fantasy, or you may be starting to have children, and that can be wild if you're like maybe the only person out of your friend group who is becoming a mother or a father. Good luck, Charlie, because that could not be me right now. At the end of the day, you do need those moments of silence because beautiful things can grow within those pockets of solitude. Y'all, the power of the tongue is so real. So however you need to reframe your mind, whether that's talking to yourself in the mirror every morning and maybe like reciting affirmations or just writing them down on sticky notes, putting them on your wall, journaling, whatever you have to do to reframe your mindset, connecting with your faith, whatever you have to do, I encourage you and implore you to explore, because whatever's going on up here in your brain will manifest itself out here in the world. Hi everyone, you're listening to Transplants, the podcast for 20-somethings moving to a new city and trying to navigate all the trials and tribulations that come with it. I'm your host Joyce, and today we're going to be talking about being lonely versus being alone. Both are experiences that you'll likely endure when you first move to a new city and know absolutely no one in that city. And during this time, I feel like it's very important for you to understand the distinction and the differences between being alone versus being lonely and how to combat the latter. I feel like this is especially relevant right now during the winter as well, when a lot of people are facing seasonal depression, and this is just a hard time of year for a lot of people. So hopefully this can be referenced at any point of the year and can give you some pointers. I personally haven't thought about the idea of like being alone versus being lonely in a while until I like started planning for this episode, just because I'm someone who's very like used to being alone. Like I moved to Columbus alone and I spend a lot of time alone. That's just like a fact of my life right now, which is definitely fine, and I'm definitely happy, like being alone. But at the same time, I think it can be hard to realize when you are lonely because you're just kind of just going through the motions and you're just like used to how your life is, and it can be hard to catch yourself before things may take a turn for the worse and maybe you start feeling depressed, anxious, and things like that. When I first moved to Columbus, there were definitely points and moments in time where I felt lonely. And loneliness, I feel like, is something that I'm still learning to deal with. And that's definitely, I think, just a part of life, but can especially be amplified in your 20s when there's so much change. But luckily for me, when I first moved, I was connected with a lot of people who also just moved to Columbus through work. So we were able to find our little community and little family that way. But not a lot of people get that same opportunity. So hopefully this episode helps out those people who are in that situation. But yeah, I'm happy to say that I feel more alone than lonely nowadays. And hopefully this episode can help people like work through all the things and identify all the emotions that they may be feeling, and then take away some ways to like deal with that. But yeah, I think that's just something that is a continuous thing for me to work on, and will likely be the same situation for you. Loneliness, I feel like, is something that people in their 20s particularly feel a lot, just because this is like a defining decade, me referencing that book. Actually, that's a very good book for you to read and add to your bookshelf. It's about like navigating your 20s. But I feel like loneliness, it comes in a lot of different ways, especially because this is like a time when most people are like graduating college and like trying to figure out adulthood, post college, and like moving to a new city, which is what this podcast is all about. And as much as there's like newness and a lot of opportunity to connect with new people, go on adventures, and like connect with yourself, that the flip side of that leads to like a lot of time alone, because like I mentioned earlier, you may move to a new city where you know absolutely no one, or you may be solo traveling and like doing your backpacking across Europe, living your European fantasy, or you may be starting to have children, And that can be wild if you're like maybe the only person out of your friend group who is becoming a mother or a father. Good luck, Charlie, because that could not be me right now. But there are definitely a lot of different moments throughout your 20s and throughout your life where you may feel lonely, alone, or isolated. But tapping into what it means to be or to feel lonely versus alone, loneliness is something that has like a negative connotation, right? Loneliness is it comes down to perception. Loneliness is like a matter of perception, right? How you perceive things. And it's something that you can feel very deeply, like it's emotionally charged. So when you're lonely, loneliness can happen in different scenarios. So like, for example, you may be, in a room full of people, but you still feel lonely. You're not necessarily alone, right? Because you're in a room full of people, but you feel lonely. Or for another example, you might be in a relationship with someone, but it's perhaps a toxic relationship. And every time you try to talk to this person, you feel like you're talking to a brick wall. You may feel lonely in that relationship because you're not getting what you hope out of said relationship. So it all comes down to like how you feel and like the story you tell yourself when you're feeling lonely versus when you're alone. That's just like a matter of fact. That is like factual, evidence based. Like I'm sitting alone in this room right now recording this episode, or when I drive my car to work in the morning, I am alone because I'm the only person in the car. That is just a known fact versus being lonely. That is something, like I said, is emotionally charged and comes down to your perception of the situation. Combating loneliness and just going through any difficult situation in your life, I think comes down to like reframing your mindset. So you have to be very aware of like the story you tell yourself. And say you're spending a lot of time alone and you're like, oh, I hate spending time alone. I feel so lonely. Try reframing that to be like, oh, I get to spend some time alone and I get to spend some quality time with myself. That helps you think of this time alone as like kind of like a privilege, I guess, and like an opportunity to maybe do some self-discovery, try a new hobby, etc., etc. You have to remember that you have the right to choose. And if you don't have the right to choose right now, maybe like you being alone is not necessarily a choice because you maybe don't have any friends in this city. It's important for you to make a plan so that one day you do get to have a choice. And when you do have that choice, it feels good inside for you, no matter what decision you do choose. As cheesy as it may sound, you have the ability to change your life at any given moment. So hopefully this is like a kick in the booty to like reframe your mindset and kind of rewrite the story that you tell yourself when you feel these moments of loneliness, and hopefully sparks you to take action and maybe reach out to your community, do whatever you need to do to combat the loneliness. I think the story that you tell yourself is something that's definitely important to keep in mind, and just to remain self-aware during these times, because I've mentioned this in a previous episode, but what your brain is telling you isn't necessarily true in every situation, especially if you feel very like isolated and lonely. You have to remind yourself that there is community out there and people do, love you and care for you. And if you are genuinely in a situation where you feel like no one is there, one, I am here for you in any way, shape, or form that I can be. But also, loneliness is a shared human experience. That's something that I've definitely had to learn over the past year or two. Loneliness is not isolated. It does not exist in a vacuum, and you do not exist in a vacuum, because as much as you are feeling lonely right now, your friend Sally Sue back home or your neighbor or whoever is likely feeling the same way. So I think it's important for you to definitely feel your feelings, but also go a level up and remember that we're all human beings going through the same thing. and you are not alone in what you're feeling right now. I hope that can be a good reminder when you're scared of being alone. I feel like when you're scared of being alone, you may tend to like overextend yourself to just be around people all the time, just to be with them physically, or like always be calling someone, or like just have some type of background noise, which I feel like is fine. But at the end of the day, you do need those moments of silence because beautiful things can grow within those pockets of solitude, especially for like my extroverted people out there. Tune into the last episode of introverts versus extroverts in a new city. But I feel like extroverts may tend to feel more lonely at some points just because we do like overextend ourselves because, we talk to everyone, can be friends with everyone, whatever. But that can lead to loneliness because it's like, who at the end of the day is like my real friend, and like how much time do I actually spend myself? You know what I mean? I think friendly reminder, it's okay for you to like be selfish and set boundaries so that you are able to like invest quality time in getting to know yourself and being comfortable with yourself, because like I said, you're going to be spending a lot of time with yourself during this time and just throughout your life in general. So making that time, that intentional time to be with yourself is so important, just because that leads to so much growth and so much more self-awareness, and you'll be able to navigate your life much more intentionally and purposefully. On the other hand, like I mentioned at the top of the episode, being alone is just a descriptive fact. So once again, I am alone sitting in this room recording this podcast episode for you, or this person is standing alone on the side of the street. That is like, that's a bad image to paint, but you get what I'm trying to say. Oftentimes when we are alone, we experience something called solitude, which is defined as the quality of state or being alone. I saw on TikTok the other day a video of Jay Shetty describing something from a philosopher called, I think, Paul Tillich. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But Jay was saying how Paul, in like his work, basically states that solitude is the strength and power of being alone. And I 100,000% agree with that, because when in solitude, you have the opportunity to connect deeper with yourself and just reach a greater state of self-awareness that is needed just to navigate life. Because how are you gonna move through life without being self-aware? You're just shooting yourself in the foot. When you're in solitude, you have the opportunity to connect with you at like your deepest level, connect with like your soul, your inner core, your inner child, whatever, and just learn more about yourself. And once you've done that, that helps you just walk through life better and connect through other people better, just because you're so rooted in your sense of self. And that's something that I feel like a lot of 20 somethings are searching for, because we're all finding ourselves and doing that through a lot of different things. Maybe it's drugs. Hopefully it's not drugs for you. I know it's not for me, but that's an avenue a lot of people take. Or maybe it's, like I said, backpacking across Europe or South America or whatever. We're all just trying to find ourselves at the end of the day. And it's hard out here for a 20 something. It's hard out here for anyone in general, but during this time, as much as the silence and the solitude can be scary, I really want to encourage you to embrace that and fully dive into it, because you will be surprised at what you will discover about yourself. Because you might be telling yourself these stories that you've been telling yourself all your life from, when you've grown up and gone through school and blah, 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 blah. And you've just had so much input from other people, like your friends, your family, your teachers, your colleagues, whatever. But in your 20s, this is like the first time in your life when you're like alone, especially if you went to school at home, or this is like your first time living on your own. This is the first time where you don't have like feedback from other people, and you're really able to just be with yourself and, take care of yourself, learn who you are, which can be scary, but The unlearning process, yes, is very difficult, but can be very liberating at the same time. Contrary to loneliness, which is a more negative driven emotion and experience, solitude and being alone is a more positive state because you get to choose. So, for example, I am choosing to stay in on this Friday night rather than go out to the bars and the clubs. You have the choice to be alone rather than spend your time with people. And I feel like in your 20s and in life in general, you'll find yourself in moments of solitude a lot, especially when you first move. You have to learn how to navigate these moments of solitude and reframe your mindset, because being alone doesn't really feel like a choice right now, especially when you don't know anybody in the city that you just moved to. But once you take the time to spend time with yourself, get to know with yourself, and embrace those moments of solitude, like I said, when you do have the choice, you feel like the choice is more liberating and you're more rooted in truth and rooted in purpose. You'll feel more confident in your choice and start to walk with more confidence and reassurance in yourself, just generally speaking. So the biggest difference between experiencing loneliness and being alone and being in solitude is literally just your mindset, which I think is a big takeaway for just navigating difficult decisions in life, especially during / after your big move, because your mindset will just it determines how like you walk through life and how you move through life. Y'all, the power of the tongue is so real. So however you need to reframe your mind, whether that's talking to yourself in the mirror every morning and maybe like reciting affirmations, or just writing them down on sticky notes, putting them on your wall, journaling, whatever you have to do to reframe your mindset, connecting with your faith, whatever you have to do, I encourage you and implore you to explore, because whatever's going on up here in your brain will manifest itself out here in the world. And sometimes at the end of all this, you may even discover that your own company is the best company. And sometimes that is the case, but don't take that too far, because you need people in your life and you need to have some human interaction. Please go outside and touch grass. Thank you. But yeah, don't be afraid of the solitude. Do not fear the solitude, because you need to know like your inner dialogue. You need to understand your thoughts and how you work. You need to understand your habits and behaviors so that you know how to navigate different situations. You know how you respond in different situations, and how you can take next steps to go forward and, do your best job at work, do your best job in your relationships, do whatever you need to do. I hope this doesn't sound too preachy, but I just hope this helps anyone who may be feeling lonely right now, because I know how self-loathing and self-deprecating that experience can be, because it feels like you're being punished. I can just picture how, especially if you're a transplant and you just moved and you have no one, it can feel like a punishment, and you're just sitting in your apartment surrounded by all your boxes you haven't unpacked yet, and you're just sitting there and you're like, God, why am I all alone? Why does no one like me? And I feel you, because I definitely experienced that at some point when I first moved to Ohio. But like I said, you're not the only one going through it. This is not me downplaying your emotions or anything. Your emotions are so valid, and feel all the feels, but please don't stay and sit and marinate in those emotions, because we're not gonna progress if we keep doing that. But your loneliness and your solitude is not a punishment. It is think of it as a reward. It's a reward for you making the choice or making the move to wherever you are. It's a reward for all the hard work you did to get here. And it's a reward for all the actions and sacrifices you've taken. And hopefully you can relish in that. you can embrace that and use that to your advantage, and ultimately discover new things about yourself that will allow you to show up as your best, authentic, true self and connect with others like you. But yeah, remember, you are not unwanted. You are not unimportant. You are a valuable human being that is worthy of being on this earth. If you feel lonely right now, I am here for you. Please comment and we can do a little chit chatty. We can kiki. But yeah, that concludes today's episode, and I hope you guys found it helpful. Please be sure to follow Transplants on all streaming platforms and comment down below if this episode was helpful for you. In the episode description, you will also find a link to a topic request form. So if you want to hear anything and everything on Transplants, the podcast, please let me know, because I want this to be as beneficial to you as possible, because this show is for you. And if you need some advice, maybe you're about to move or you have gone through your move and this problem, this dilemma, this challenge has been knocking on your brain, let me know. And maybe your problem will be talked about in a future episode. But yeah, that concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to follow Transplants on Instagram and TikTok as well, at Transplants Podcast. And yeah, that concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, you're not as alone as you think.